Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. After the Fukushima disaster just a few years back, I would think that many people would be very alarmed at the possibility of terrorism that would happen to nuclear power plants, especially here in the United States. But you don't hear a whole lot going on with something like that. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is author of the book End of Days, and he has the newest one out that should be able to raise a flag to make us more aware that maybe we should be more proactive in protecting at least our nuclear power plants. If, in fact, we just don't decide to do something about that, it could be devastating. He has spent more than 40 years in the New York book industry and has published many scientists, politicians, and military experts. He also starred in his 2-hour History Channel special, largely devoted to nuclear terrorism, and has discussed the subject on many national TV and radio talk shows, as well as lecturing at universities around the country. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, author of the book The Nuclear Terrorist, our guest, Robert Gleason. Robert, how are you today?
Oh, I'm fine. Thanks for having me on.
Now, this is a very alarming book that you've written here because of the fact that it isn't really something a lot of people think about. You know, sure, we had the attacks on 9/11, but pretty much our nuclear facilities, have very limited security.
Yeah, that most people don't realize that it's private cops, it's rent-a-cops that not only guard the nuclear power plants, but they guard the nuclear weapons labs, the big labs where we store, the bomb, the nuclear bomb fuel, the fissile nuclear bomb fuel is defended by oftentimes elderly rent-a-cops.
Now,
very lightly armed too, very lightly armed.
Yeah, I've got some pepper spray.
Yeah.
I know when I was reading in the book about that, I was thinking to myself, wait a minute, these are areas that really should be protected because all it takes is for a slight meltdown and you're in a world of hurt.
Well, also, most people don't realize, too, that if you can get your hands on the fissile nuclear bomb fuel, the Hiroshima-type bomb fuel, that if you get a chunk that's the size of a large grapefruit, and you put two chunks, and you put one on the floor and one 6 feet above it, and you drop the one and you hit it square, you can get 50% of the Hiroshima yield. If you put smaller chunks into a piece of Civil War cannon barrel and you blast one into the other, you could conceivably get the Hiroshima yield. You get pretty close. You could get pretty close to it. So the big thing is, it's the technology for cobbling a very crude but powerful Hiroshima-style nuke together is not that difficult. The guy that invented the system, a physicist named Luis Alvarez, who was Nobel laureate at Los Alamos, he said that even a high school kid could do it. So that it's horrendously important that the fissile nuclear bomb fuel be very tightly secured. And the security is, unfortunately at times, laughable, literally laughable. Recently, about 2 years ago, an 82-year-old nun, the site that has the largest quantity of this stuff in the United States, the bomb-grade highly enriched uranium, HEU, the site that has the most of it, something like 100 tons, is the Y-12 facility at Oak Ridge. In Tennessee. An 82-year-old nun, as a peace protest, broke into it. She went through the chain link fence with bolt cutters and cut her way through the barbed wire, walked several miles, and then sat down in front of the big building. She spray painted some peace slogans on the walls, and she sang peace songs. And she sat there several hours, completely nobody paid any attention to her, until finally a lone guard happened to come by her. After several hours, if she'd gone in with a team of 19 guys like 9/11 and busted their way into that building, they would have had total access to and also these scenarios. It's only prudent to assume in any of these scenarios that the terrorists have one or two trusted insiders working with them.
Now, I know that in the book that the Obama administration is someone that you say, look, these guys not only don't seem very concerned about this, but they seem to be moving in a direction to create more nuclear power plants. What's going on with that?
Yeah, you find that behind whenever a nuclear state, a state proliferate a nuclear weapon system, the very first thing they do, they want to have a secret nuclear weapons program. The very first thing they do is they get into the nuclear power industry, because it's very difficult to build extremely difficult to build a nuclear power reactor. But you can buy one from the United States. Our countries will go build it. Obama right now is trying to sell 2 nuclear power plants. His people are trying to sell 2 nuclear power plants to the Saudis. And as we know, Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, she said that the Saudis were the number one financier worldwide, wealthy Saudis, of Sunni-backed terrorist groups, which would include ISIS and it would include Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and of course 15 out of the 19 9/11 hijackers were Saudis, and yet the Obama administration is trying to sell them nuclear power plants, and these reactors. It's hard to build a reactor, but a nuclear bomb fuel reprocessor. There have been a couple of studies at Oak Ridge and Sandia that indicated that a half a dozen technicians, they'd have to know what they're doing, but a half a dozen technicians with the equipment from an old dairy or an old winery could build a nuclear bomb fuel reprocessor in about 6 months. And in about 1 month, if they had the spent fuel rods from your nuclear power reactor, they could build enough, they could manufacture enough bomb-grade plutonium to fuel the Nagasaki bomb. And this stuff can be done also. There's been studies that demonstrated you could do this in a clandestine way. That by the time the UN Atomic Energy Agency caught on to you, that you could have several bombs, and then it's too late. You've crossed the Rubicon. And nobody wants to hit you because you might hit them back. And the Obama administration, not only 2 of his most highly placed people came out during the first term, came out of the nuclear. They'd made a lot of money off the nuclear industry. They'd each made millions of dollars. Rahm Emanuel and David Axelrod, they made millions off the nuclear power industry. But the nuclear power industry had been Obama's number one campaign contributor until he received the presidential nomination. Then obviously all kinds of people jumped on board to throw money at him. But they had bankrolled his political career more than anybody else. Furthermore, he'd campaigned that he was going to be, when he ran for the first term, he campaigned that he was going to be tough on him. And as soon as he took office, he reversed that 100. He did a George W. Bush type reversal on that. Just reversed himself 180 degrees. Everything he said during the campaign turned out not to be true.
Mm-hmm. I know one of the alarming things when you consider nuclear terrorists, that let's just use one scenario for a power plant. If they were to go and to basically exercise their terrorist powers and explode it, destroy it, whatever it is, what would be the outcome of just one power plant? What would happen there?
Well, there's it would depend on its proximity to a large metropolitan city, big city, and a big surrounding area of the city. Now, a lot of these power plants, they build them near these cities because they want, they want to sell power to them, and they want it to be nearby. They also have to be near large bodies of water, like big rivers. For instance, Indian Point, which is 35 miles from Midtown Manhattan, is on the Hudson River. It's got to be, which is a huge river. I live on the Hudson. I'm looking at it right now, and that they have to be. They all have to be by big bodies of water. You know how much water Indian Point uses in a day? Typically about 5 billion gallons. 5 billion gallons.
Wow.
So you're talking about not only irradiating a large population. If Indian Point had a big meltdown, Fukushima style meltdown, which could be rather easily induced by terrorists, by the way, they would irradiate an area, and most of the nuclear experts say that you really, people within a 50-mile radius are in serious trouble. They're going to get they're going to get lethal doses of radiation, and they may not die immediately, but it'll make them real sick over a period of a decade or two.
Mm-hmm.
That you'd have to evacuate 20 million people, and of course that's impossible. You know how you evacuate 20 million people? You can't. And so you just hope that people have a lot of duct tape and they have water and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably can't. You probably are afraid to use the regular water. So, and it's just nightmarish. There's a German estimate that said these kinds of incidents could cost as much over a long period of time as much as $11 trillion. U.S. GDP is about 18 million. You're talking about 2/3 of America's. I think it's more like 16 or 17 trillion. You're talking about 2/3 of the U.S. economy would be obliterated. It would bankrupt the United States. Is what it would do. You haven't had a nuclear incident which was that close to something like New York City before. We have these things, every 13 years on average. If you look at Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima, they were over a period of, it averages 3 out of 39 years, something like that. So there's about 13 years in between. These are not rare incidents.
It's just so alarming to realize that we have an administration and former administrations that seem to be really financing these terrorist groups, and you outline that fairly, meticulously in the book to let people know, look, they're standing in front of you on television saying, we protect and we care about peace here in America, but at the same time, they're going out there and they're reaching into their pockets and they're financing, for instance, North Korea. We had Donald Rumsfeld, whose company tried to sell nuclear reactors to North Korea, Dick Cheney's firm, Halliburton, who helped build up Iran and Iraq's energy sectors, and it just goes on and on and on,
Oh, yeah.
and you think to yourself,
yep.
How do we stop that kind of ridiculousness?
There's a lot of ways, obviously, and that people talk about. I mean, it's the old revolving door.
Mm-hmm.
That Dick Cheney was a defense secretary, under George H.W. Bush. There ought to be a law saying that you can't, and he also helped to fight a war. I mean, Americans got killed during that war. And instead, as soon as he gets out of office, as soon as it's feasible, he becomes the CEO of a defense contractor. That would be against it. Also that George H.W. Bush and his Secretary of State had been James Baker. They became involved with Carlyle, which also did a lot of defense contracting. So somebody asked Norm Schwarzkopf, who had been the general in charge of Desert Storm, under the George H.W. Bush administration, why he didn't take a job with a defense contractor. He could have made a fortune. Can you imagine how much money they would have paid him?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, when you've sent men into battle, and he said, and they've been killed and maimed, he said, you don't profit off their bones and blood. He said, you don't do that. And he said, no, I would never do that. And these guys get huge pensions. They don't need that money after they leave office. There ought to be laws saying you guys can't profit off your political experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it's certainly not with defense contractors, not with oil companies, not with, companies that have, that are so important to national security. And there ought to be a law, and I do a lot. I publish a lot of military guys, colonels, generals. I published a couple of 4-star generals. I published 2 defense secretaries. Everybody tells me there ought to be a law that if you're a career military officer, when you retire, you don't get to work for a defense contractor. Mm-hmm. I admired Cap Weinberger, actually, and when he left office, he never went to work for a defense contractor. He went to work for a publisher. And I love book publishing, and it's been, I made a good living. It's been good to me. But you don't get filthy rich in the book business. It's not like Wall Street. It's not like working for a drug firm. Cap never cashed out, and I really admired that in him. He had a lot of integrity, and that's the kind of people we need in office. Not only people that are good in office, but when they get out, they're not going to sell their country down the river for the sake of personal profit. And unfortunately, a lot of them do.
Yeah,
that's what you were. That's a long answer for your question.
Well, it's a good answer though, because people need to be thorough about the fact that you see a lot of so-called flag-waving Americans, you know, Bush, Cheney, and that sort of thing, and I'm thinking, are you people out of your mind, really?
You know, maybe you need a constitutional amendment that says that, because these guys, we have guys that are voting on their own salaries. How would you like to vote on your own salary? How would you like to vote on your retirement benefits? How would you like to vote on the regulations to state whether or not you can go work for, you know, let's say you were at the head of the Pentagon. Now you can go work for a defense contractor whom you were previously buying stuff from. You know, that you can now sell it to your successors. But that's what we do. We allow these guys to vote on their own self-aggrandizement, and it's clearly stupid. They obviously are never going to pass legislation outlining that. So maybe it takes a constitutional amendment. I think it would be easy enough to get the signatures and get. I think obviously any voter in the world would want to stop that stuff. And I would include the generals in there too. I mean, I don't think the generals should spend their lives, you know, should turn around and sell, you know, and sell defense stuff to their cronies, their military cronies.
I know it seemed to be a little bit off track, but sometimes you got to take a look at the thinking that goes behind what protects us, and sometimes you don't feel very protected at all. It's as though you're standing there naked saying, well, I'm waving an American flag, I'm living on the soil, I've been a citizen, what are you going to do for me, sort of a thing, you know, and that's what government is allegedly supposed to do, is to protect us, but it doesn't seem that it's done a great job. And when we go back and we take a look at the nuclear terrorists, I know that listeners out there are thinking, okay, well, I can see that it's devastating if they hit one power plant, you know, think about many, or, you know, but I say the scenario can be a lot worse than that. And you actually share about how Al-Qaeda, you know, is, when you take a look at a global terrorist situation here, that can get real ugly real fast.
Well, and you have real-life nuclear terrorists in Pakistan today that are blowing up Pakistani nuclear facilities. And they are the best trained, they're the smartest, they're the most organized, and they would know how to melt down Indian Point in about one hot second.
Now, talk about the scenario on a global scale, what would be set up there, because it was really alarming to realize they could make it look like it was a nuclear attack where nations would actually start shooting nuclear weapons off against each other.
Yeah, I actually wrote a novel about that called End of Days, in which it was a false flag operation that a small rogue, very wealthy rogue state, which had purchased on the black market a lot of nuclear technology, nuclear weaponry, that they created the illusion that Russia was nuking the great powers, and they did it in a very clever way. It was based on a nuclear war scenario by Herman Kahn called Catalytic Nuclear War. And he said, and a lot of experts have said, if you ever had a nuclear Armageddon, that would be the most likely scenario. And that, so you'd get everybody just emptying all their sub-tubes and all their missile silos and everything, thinking that they're defending themselves against a nuclear adversary, when in fact they're provoking a response from somebody who has not been nuking them. And so I wrote a novel about it. But you could do the same thing with a single nuclear strike. And by the way, I don't envision, Obama envisions that, you know, his worst nightmare, I think, keeps him up all night, is worrying about a single nuclear weapon getting into New York City. I'd worry about a half a dozen. The problem is that the nuclear fissile bomb field, you know, the place, nobody knows this, but if you really wanted to go get a lot of fissile nuclear bomb fuel, you know, the place you'd want to go, it's not Russia, which you could certainly bribe people there and get it. You'd want to go to Japan. Japan has, it's part of their culture. They have huge amounts of nuclear explosive. And it's part of their culture that they're not supposed to guard it. They think it's somehow an insult to the Japanese people. And it's driven the Obama people crazy. It drove the Bush people crazy. They can't reason with them. And they'll say things to them like, the Japanese people don't steal. They'll say things like, the terrorists don't target Japan. Everybody likes Japan. Nobody's going to steal from us. And we're not like your country where we have to worry about things. We're the people. We're civilized, you know, whatever. and of course they have been targeted by terrorists. The cleanup site at Fukushima was run largely by the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia. I mean, this is just pure. It's the purest kind of nuclear. I had a chapter in the book, as you know, called "Nuclear Lunatics," and it's about what Robert J. Lipton called nuclear messiahs. It's people that have drunk the nuclear Kool-Aid and turned it into a kind of a cult. They just love all things nuclear. The Japanese are actually they're the worst of the nuclear lunatics. They are nuts on this subject, and it's too easy to get that stuff. So if you can steal, say, 100 pounds of it, over a period of several years, why not steal 1,000 pounds? Why not steal 600 pounds? Then you got enough for 6 or 8 bombs, 9 or 10 bombs, and then you go in and you set off, instead of setting off a single nuke in an American city, you set off 7 or 8. The problem with setting off one is that you cannot predict America's response. We may just go crazy because one nuke is so beyond bearing. You set one off at Times Square in rush hour, and it'll obliterate everything. There'll be a circle of obliteration that's 2/3 of a mile in diameter. And then that says nothing about what the firestorms will do and what all the peripheral damage will do. You're talking about, coming pretty close to bankrupting the United States as well as killing just insane amounts of people, over 1 million people. You're talking about, really, and it's also because it's a ground burst, you're going to get the worst radiation fallout, radioactive fallout in the history of the world. The Nagasaki and Hiroshima were air bursts, so you didn't get as much of the radioactive debris lofted up into the air and then dispersed by the winds. You would get that if you did a terrorist nuking. It's never been tested. It's so bad, no nation has ever tested a ground burst, right flat on the ground. And that to me, that is really, because the problem is you set off one, and the Americans might just say, that is so beyond bearing, we can't risk another strike. We're going to go down our enemies list and incinerate all of them. And however, if you took out 6 or 8 American cities, and then you say, we got a dozen more nukes, and we'll take out more if you do anything, America might just give up. It might retreat, get rid of all our military bases, retreat to go into total isolation, and stop being a player on the world stage.
One might look at this book, The Nuclear Terrorist, and say, well, it seems to me that you're creating an alarming situation that hasn't happened yet, but it could, and they might think, well, don't you think that you're kind of easing ideas into people that are capable of carrying this out? But the fact is if somebody's writing about it, it's probably already been thought and planned out about it years before any book ever came on the scene. What are your thoughts about this when people ask those kind of questions?
Oh, it's the old line from Pogo. I have seen the enemy, and he is us.
Right.
We have to worry about our self-inflicted wounds, and also Al Qaeda was talking about Indian Point when when they flattened the World Trade Centers on 9/11. They had a secondary target. If they couldn't get to the World Trade Centers, they were going to crash it into to Indian Point, which if they'd hit it correctly, they would have done a hell of a lot more damage than the irradiated 20 million people. It would have done a lot more damage than the World Trade Centers did, as horrendous as that was. So they've been aware of it all this time, that the Pakistanis are hitting nuclear facilities in Pakistan. I fear those are training exercises for the United States. They blew up parts of the Wanton Cantonment nuclear ordnance plant, among other nuclear facilities. It's a manufacturing plant for nukes. They killed 59 people, wounded 70, blew up parts of it, made their way right to the heart of the facility, blew a lot of stuff up. They blew up, they invaded the heart, one group invaded the largest military complex and fortification in Pakistan and got right to the heart of it, blew everything up. and then blew themselves up. These guys are incredibly well trained. They have phony uniforms on, phony military uniforms. They know where all the surveillance cameras are. They got blueprints of the installations. They have, heavy ordnance. They have phony doctored documents. They have phony tags on their vehicles. I mean, these are really smart military operations. After all, these groups were created by the Pakistani military and intelligence organs. So they're really, if they went into Indian Point, they would have everything laid out. So I can't tell these guys how to do anything. I wish they would explain to me sometime how they did their operations. As a novelist, I could use some of that information. And I don't have to teach. The father, one of the two fathers of the Pakistani nuclear program was Abdul Qadir Khan, A.Q. Khan, and that he proliferated nuclear weapons technology worldwide, as we know. He even sold it to North Korea, which is not an Islamic nation. He sold the stuff to Iran, which is a Shia nation, not a Pakistan Sunni. I mean, he would sell it to Pakistan's enemies. He didn't care. I can't teach A.Q. Khan. He tried to sell some stuff to Al-Qaeda. He tried to sell it to Saddam Hussein. I can't teach A.Q. Khan anything about proliferating nuclear weapons and how nuclear bombs work. I like to talk to him. Maybe he could give me some ideas for novels. So these guys know. They know. Right. They know far more than anything I could ever convey to them. Our biggest fear too is that the politicians and the American people themselves, aren't concerned. Or as you pointed out, they're selling nuclear stuff to potential terrorists, people who would finance and supply terrorists.
Yeah, it's really pretty scary to think about all this, and one would wonder, okay, so here I'm reading this, what do we do?
Well, I think one of the things is that we don't allow, after political people, and I would include officials, not just politicians, after they leave office, they can't go work for defense contractors. They can't work for oil firms. They can't work for nuclear firms. They can't, firms that require enormous government subsidies. You don't get to work for them. And the nuclear industry is underwritten almost entirely by the taxpayers. It really is pure socialism, except, some people at the top, profit greatly off of it, in which you don't get that in a socialist enterprise. But it really is socialism. And so therefore they shouldn't be allowed to go work for the nuclear industry once they leave office. You get rid of the revolving door, then there's no profiting off this stuff. But the other thing too is, and that it's part of the news media is it used to be that the news media, they had to have a public responsibility. They were supposed to do things to educate the public. It changed, it's become now they're expected to generate a lot of profit. They're treated, the news media is treated just like any other aspect of television or of radio or whatever. They're just supposed to make money. In other words, and the whole notion that you've got a responsibility to go out there and educate the public and do stuff to keep them informed, that's all been defenestrated. That nobody, that they're just, so, if you're just going to make money, you end up doing, a lot of human interest stuff. You do sensational stories. You cover the most, the most partisan politics, and that you don't really cover what's going on in the world. And we ought to go back to the day when these people make, and it was like, was it 99 that there was a law passed under Clinton, which allowed these big media companies to conglomerate, monopolize. So we really created some half a dozen major monopolies. So they had an opportunity to make horrendous amounts of money. There should be a public responsibility with that. Mm-hmm. But there was never any laws that said, you've got to do stuff to educate the American public. That's never, Jefferson, by the way, this is as old as the Founding Fathers. Jefferson said, called them what was in the media, he called it the Fourth Estate. And he said they were as important as any of the other three branches of government. And democracy needed them to survive. And, of course, now what we got is, we got bread in the circuses instead of the Fourth Estate.
Mm-hmm. Now, Robert, how can people find your book, and is there a website for more information about this?
Oh, yeah. If you go to my website, thanks for reminding me, it's www.thenuclearterrorist. That's with a T on the end. thenuclearterrorist.com. And they will have all kinds of places. It's Walmart has it. The Barnes and Noble has it, of course, and all BNN.com, Amazon.com, all that. It's widely available. And also, if you go to my website, there's a 7-minute clip of me on the History Channel. You can get 7 minutes of Bob, and it's something. And I'm working on a novel now, which is kind of based on the nuclear terrorist, in which I dramatize the kind of nuclear threats and attacks that I describe in the nuclear terrorist. One of the reasons I wrote the book was when I was researching End of Days, I could not find anything written about nuclear terrorism. It was like the subject that dare not speak. People would use the word, they throw the phrase around, but I couldn't find anything substantial written on it, and I kind of became obsessed with that, and I just read everything I could. I know a lot of scientists and defense secretaries and politicians and a lot of generals and stuff. I began interviewing people, asking them for names of people I could talk to, and I read everything I could get. I pieced together, thousands of little pieces of information and created the book. And as far as I know, it's the only thing written on the subject. And I had one of the guys I asked was the Pentagon's never done a study of nuclear terrorism, and I asked one of my military guys why that was, and he said the subject's too frightening. And I said, come on, that's crazy. It's a national security interest. It's a military problem. They don't get to walk away saying the subject's too frightening. And he goes, nah. And he said, it also makes it a bad joke out of everything we do. We're taught Clausewitz. We're taught, we're taught great military strategy. And he said, suddenly some ignorant little guy sets off a nuke and obliterates Manhattan. He said that makes a mockery of everything we try to do. He said that's another reason we don't study it.
Yeah, I guess being in that position, you would want to save face more than you would actually want to do what you were supposed to do, which is to serve and to protect.
Yeah, and that's the only way you can really stop a nuclear terrorist. That the nuclear fissile fuel, it doesn't give off gamma rays. Very few beta rays, particles. It gives off almost exclusively alpha particles. Those are essentially undetectable. If you can pick up a nuclear bomb field with your bare hands. Nobody believes this when I say it. Now you can't do that with nuclear waste, because nuclear waste you get a lot of oxides and compounds, and it's the stuff that the uranium clings to that becomes nuclear, becomes radioactive and toxic. But the bomb fuel itself, you can pick it up. You can put it in your shirt pocket. Cloth, human skin will block the alpha particles. You can wrap it in paper, and the paper will block the alpha particles. So it's relatively easy to smuggle. I've always said if I wanted to smuggle some stuff in, I would do it by a shipping container, and I would put it inside of the casings of some toilets, a container full of toilets, and I would. I'd ship it in that way. That you can't stop it once it's in transit. You can't find it. So the only way you can stop it is at the source. And unfortunately, a lot of that kind of stuff, that requires it's labor intensive. It requires money, and it requires a lot of diplomacy. And it also means you can't turn around and sell nuclear stuff to nations like Saudi Arabia. You can't. You know who sold it? We complain about Pakistan and Iran. You know who sold them their first reactors? Who sold them the training wheels for their nuclear weapons program? United States. Mm-hmm. You can't do stuff like that if you really want to fight nuclear terrorism. Mm-hmm. And you got to have diplomacy, where you have overall inspections of everybody's nuclear storage sites. And of course, the nuclear industry doesn't want any of this. Ultimately, you got to get rid of nuclear power. Mm-hmm. Behind every nuclear rogue state, there's nuclear power plants, nuclear power reactors. The nuclear power is the Trojan horse inside which the nuclear proliferators hide, and then they blindside us all by setting off nuclear weapons tests. And so you got to ultimately you got to outlaw nuclear power worldwide. And of course, that's an industry that has bought off so many congressmen and senators and presidents that that would be politically next to impossible. But you got to start somewhere. There was no environmental movement, and then one day Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring. And then overnight, everybody got worried about the environment. Solzhenitsyn wrote a novel called One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, and overnight, everybody recognized that the Soviet Union's how horrible their Gulag archipelago was.
Thinking about the nuclear terrorists, for the listeners, I know there have been people that I would talk to. I'd kind of bring the subject up and say, what do you think about this? And it's interesting how the general reaction so far is, well, that's not going to happen. That's never going to happen here. Well, we thought about that about 9/11. We'd never have an attack on U.S. soil. The fact is that this is something that's very real, and I think what's really important about books like this when they do come out is that it makes you aware of what we're being presented as information about what's going on outside of our own country. And you start realizing sometimes, well, wait a minute, as you were saying earlier, that there isn't a lot being written on this, and there's not a lot being talked about, but yet you were describing some very devastating events in Pakistan about the explosion and the terrorism on the nuclear side of things, and you think, that's where you can start saying, why aren't you guys, as the news media, being more accountable to sharing this information so that maybe we're more prepared for something like this?
Right. Nobody's covering those events in Pakistan. And by the way, the group that's been doing it, Tariq-i-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP, that group's only about 7 years old. Mm-hmm. And also this ISIS, which is, as you know, everybody knows now from Syria and Iraq. I think they're calling it now Islamic State, actually. That it's changed its name a couple of times. It's worth about $2 billion. I mean, these people are not only capable of conquering cities, they're organized enough to do that. They got a lot of money. Now you put these guys in, they've been robbing every bank that they got near, and also once you become that powerful, people will start throwing money at you, and it's just money begets money, power begets power, and you put them together, and they will form alliances. You put them together with the TTP people from Pakistan, and they're all ideologically, sympathetic with each other. That they put them together, and those guys would have the expertise, the money. They have, and the thing that makes the Pakistani terrorists so dangerous is they have greater access to nuclear bomb fuel than most other terrorists. That the Pakistanis are so are bizarre. The previous during Obama's first term, the ambassador to Pakistan, we learned this through Wikipedia, through WikiLeaks. She said she wasn't afraid of terrorists stealing Pakistan's fissile nuclear bomb fuel. She was afraid of government employees stealing it, the people responsible for it, stealing it, and then giving it or selling it to terrorists. And you can't trust the employees over there. That they're so afraid that India and the United States are going to come in and do a bin Laden assassination type operation, except we will go in and we will essentially take over all their nuclear weapon storage sites. In order to make that impossible, they keep somewhere between 30 and 50 nuclear weapons and canisters of nuclear bomb fuel. They keep them on trucks, in caravans, in constant motion, in constant transit, just wandering, like the what's the lost mariner, the ghost ship that wanders the seas perpetually? Well, these caravans wander the Pakistani roads and highways perpetually, because then, so if we knock over some nuclear sites, they will still have these bombs that are in transit, and we won't know where they are. Now, of course, those are very poorly secured. That if you really wanted to go blow up a caravan and steal some weapons, they're trucks. How can you fortify a truck that's in motion on the highway? You can't. And so people will know the routes they're taking, because as that ambassador pointed out, that a lot of the Pakistani employees are sympathetic to the terrorists, and they may be afraid of them too. They may be getting blackmailed or something. And so the Pakistani terrorists, they have the best nuclear training, they have the greatest access to nuclear bomb materials, and particularly if they got into some alliance with some group like ISIS, we would be in serious trouble. And it'd probably be one of those things, if it hit, we probably wouldn't know much about it in advance. And also that even if we did, you still got rent-a-cops, protecting the Indian Point.
I find it funny that earlier in the program we were talking about the responsibility of the media, or their lack thereof, of informing us and letting us know that these things are going on, so that we can be better prepared or be more proactive, especially with our government. And I'll give you an idea. I just happened to pop on Yahoo, and here's one of the big news items. 9/11 related Ninja Turtles poster sparks outrage.
Yep.
I don't know. Should we really be alarmed about that?
Oh, yeah. I think so. I think Thomas Jefferson called the shot, a long time ago. There's something, I'm a big fan of the ancient Greeks, and I love the Odyssey, and every so often I'll reread Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian Wars. He's got a 4-page chapter, because there's a big question. This was a completely self-destructive civil war. The Greeks and the Spartans, they spoke the same language, slightly different dialects, but completely comprehensible to each other. And they fought this war, went on for 28 years, and it destroyed the greatest democracy in world history. Was Athens. That we copied all their institutions, we copied their art, their science, their letters. The Renaissance was the rebirth of Athenian culture and science, and they made us. We wouldn't exist if they hadn't existed. And it destroyed. It cost Athens everything, and it destroyed their government, their culture, everything. Why did it drag on? That Athens was so powerful it could have cut a deal earlier on. And at one point Thucydides quotes, because they had an Athenian square where all the demagogic politicians would gather and they would argue against the war, for the war, continuing it. And he quotes excerpts from the speeches that the demagogues would give. And it's the same speeches have been repeated throughout history. And it's that the demagogic warmongers, that if you come out against war, let's cut a deal, let's end the stupid war, then you're weak, you're cowardly. That you haven't, you owe it to the brave heroes that died in battle to avenge, what they did. They have not died in vain. Let's go kill the people that killed them. And it's every single one of these. And so any of the crazy, a year ago, that remember that there were people in Congress screaming that we should go arm ISIS? If we'd given ISIS Stinger missiles, they'd be shooting our planes down over Iraq and Syria, just like they're doing with, just like those people are doing over the Ukraine. And there's still people screaming that we ought to arm the quote Sunni moderates. You arm the Sunni moderates, ISIS just takes those weapons away from them. They can't stand up to them. And but there's still people. You got to be strong. You got to be forceful. You don't want to be weak. It's the same arguments that were going on 2,500 years ago in ancient Athens. It seems to be kind of human nature. Well, we got to get smarter. And I think I'm optimistic. I think it's possible to get smarter.
Well, there's that, and there's also the other fallback position too. We can be a lot like Sweden.
Well, yeah, I said that. I'm very And I'm very old, very good friends, an old-time Cold Warrior. His name is Jerry Purnell. Co-authored The Moon and Gone Sign, Lucifer's Hammer, Footfalls. One of them was a #1 New York Times bestseller, the other #2. And he was on a lot. He was on inertial guidance, scientific committees, and he was a strategist during the Cold War, nuclear, ballistic weapons strategist. And I said to him once, I said, Jerry, when you get into a world where every rogue state that has access to nuclear weapons can get them. Any rogue state that wants to get nuclear weapons and wants to use them surreptitiously, they can get those weapons. And they can use them without leaving their fingerprints on them. In fact, maybe frame another rogue state or another terrorist group for the strike. I said, what does that do to grand strategy? What does that do to America's global strategy? And he said to me, Bob, he said, when was the last time somebody hijacked a Swedish airliner? When was the last time somebody blew up a Swedish embassy? And I said, probably never. They said, yeah, never. He said, I never heard of it. And he said, you know why? I said, why? And he said, nobody hates the Swedes. And he said, there's a lot of deterrence in not being hated. And he said, in an age where everybody that wants a nuke can get a nuke, he said, you learn to be a good neighbor. And he said, you don't have to be a doormat. And he said, but you don't meddle. You don't go and get involved in stupid wars that you have nothing to do with. Mm-hmm. And he said, you help people. You actually go and you try to be charitable. You try to help people where you can. And he said, and you leave people alone, and you let the nations of the world know that they can trust you. You're not going to go out of your way to do them harm or push them around. And of course, the thing that destroyed Athens was it was very powerful. Democracies are great at generating capital. I mean, they are a capital-making machine, and it was wealthier than all of its neighbors. And of course, it was a bully, and it was constantly pushing everybody, trying to exact tribute from everybody, scared everybody to death. And so one day, all its neighbors, united and went after him, mm-hmm. led by Sparta. And you don't want to. You want to be a good friend. You want to be a good neighbor in this new nuclear age, and that's something else we would have to learn.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating.
That isn't. Every war we've had since the Mexican War has been an unnecessary preemptive war, mm-hmm. and that the only one that wasn't was World War II, and that's because those guys declared war on us. Mm-hmm. We didn't have a chance to declare war on them. And that you kind of get rid of that attitude. That Mark Twain wrote a great essay about America's involvement in the Philippines during the Spanish-American War, which went on forever. It was kind of like Vietnam, where we killed an enormous number of people. We lost a lot of guys, and dragged on for like 10 years or something. And we did it. The reason we did it was to take care of, protect that poor, ignorant person sitting in darkness. That was the real messy, kind of a missionary type zeal. And at the end of the essay, Twain said, maybe the person sitting in darkness would prefer sitting in darkness. Maybe we should let them sit in their darkness and not go over there and kill them. And that's we would have to reverse the American psychology in order to do all this, but it may become necessary.
Mm-hmm. The book is The Nuclear Terrorist. Our guest today, Robert Gleason. Again, go ahead and give out that website for our listeners.
Yeah, the www.thenuclearterrorist with a T singular, thenuclearterrorist.com.
Very good. Robert, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you so much.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there. Again, we present these talks so that way you can start paying attention and realize that the news that you're hearing just isn't as important as the news we should be hearing. The stuff that gets us more proactively involved in the kind of nation that we want to live in, where we enjoy our freedoms and are protected with our liberties. And books like The Nuclear Terrorist certainly should open your eyes to get you more proactive. We also encourage you to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We also have our exclusive updates we encourage you to sign up for as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you again for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.